Hello, good crowd. We are so incredibly fortunate today. We have with us Jonathan Foley, who is the executive director of Project Drawdown. We're talking about climate solutions today that are real, that we can invest in, that we can implement, that have been implemented. This is exciting stuff. Such a positive spin on such a challenging topic. You don't want to miss this episode.
Welcome to the Your Mark on the World show with your champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me here today.
Well, we're thrilled. It was fun talking to founder Paul Hawken a couple of months back. We're excited to have you on the show to continue this discussion. It is such a vitally important topic. Trillions of dollars need to be invested in climate solutions. And so there are an infinite number of opportunities for impact investors and social entrepreneurs. Jonathan, what gets you excited right now, today?
Well, climate change is something that's very easy to get depressed about if you only pay attention to what's happening with our politicians. Looking at Washington these days or the UN and all that, it kind of feels like we're not doing enough. And that's true. The politicians aren't doing enough at the federal and international level. That's true. But I do get excited by seeing what else is going on. Our cities and states are leading across the world. Innovators, entrepreneurs, inventors, makers are doing incredible new things. We're seeing technology change by the week in really exciting, powerful ways. And so while the political process at the macro level seems kind of bogged down, and that's too bad, we see lots of innovation happening at the local level, at the technological level, at the market level. And that's what I'm really excited about. And I really want to help illuminate those things and lift them up into the world and show that we can, in fact, make real strides to addressing climate change. And we're really beginning to.
Oh, that's great. As you look at the list that you have created of 100 solutions, 80 that are already scaling, 20 more that are proven and yet are not yet scaling.
Right.
I mean, it is really an impressive smorgasbord of opportunities for investors and entrepreneurs already, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That's the thing that's beautiful about it is that, as you point out, there are solutions already here, dozens and dozens and dozens of them, and they're viable. We looked at them in kind of the first incarnation of Drawdown, which led to this book. I'll pull it up, this great book that's on the New York Times bestseller list. It's a great resource. We already have to update this because it's changing so quickly all the time. But what we found is that, in fact, yes, there are dozens and dozens of solutions. If we add them all together, they're more than enough to stop climate change if we really deploy them at scale. And the preliminary kind of financial analysis is for every dollar we spend doing this, we would return 3 to 4 more back to the economy. That's not even counting avoiding the damages of really bad climate change in the future, which it could be untold trillions and trillions of dollars and literally hundreds of millions of lives affected. So this is like the best bargain in human history. If you think like an entrepreneur, like your audience does, this may be the single biggest business opportunity in human history. We literally have to reinvent our energy systems, our food systems, our manufacturing, our cities, everything. You could look at that as like, crap, that's a really big problem. I think we had to look at it as like, wow, what a great opportunity, especially if we do it right. We can improve lives. We could reduce inequity. We could solve some of our other social ills if we do it wisely. And we could build a better world for future generations and for ourselves. Sign me up. Let's do it.
Yeah. Now, most of us outside of the Drawdown inner circle, when we think about climate change solutions, we really think we're going deep when we get all the way to wind. We go solar and wind, and we're like, wow, we've got 2 really good solutions for climate change. There are 80 or 98 others on your list. What are some of the other opportunities for us on the list?
Well, this is a great question, and we want to go deep if we're going to solve this problem. And it's not really that hard. Basically, it really helps to remember that climate change basically starts with 5 things. First is producing electricity. That's about a quarter of the problem. It comes from making electricity, burning coal and oil and gas. And that's where solar and wind and batteries help out. But another quarter of climate change is caused by food and land use and forestry, kind of clearing rainforest, those burping cows, overusing fertilizer and all that. So food and electricity turn out to be equally important to solve climate change. So there's a whole bunch of other solutions over here we can take. That's about half of climate change. Then we have industry, things like making steel, making concrete, materials, manufacturing. There's lots of things we can do there. Some are challenging, but some are maybe ready to go. Then we have transportation, cars, trucks, airplanes, and the rest. Lots of interesting things to do there. And then we have buildings. So it's electricity, food, industry, transport, and buildings. Those are the top five. Together, that's 90% of what causes climate change.
Buildings are just sitting there. What are they doing? Well, how are they producing climate change?
Well, first is the materials used to build a building. If you look at what we call the life cycle of, what it took to make the stuff, what it takes when it's there, and what do you take when it's disposed of. You look at the kind of cradle to grave, material budget of a building. There was energy and greenhouse gas emissions tied to all those components, especially concrete. It turns out making concrete is one of the biggest producers of CO2 in the atmosphere outside of the energy sector. It takes energy to make concrete, of course, but actually the chemistry of when concrete hardens in Portland cement, it actually releases CO2 chemically, nothing to do with energy, just chemically out of the cement into the air. We need to make new kinds of cement, because if cement were a country, by the way, it'd be the third largest emitter of CO2 in the world after China and the United States. So we need to have carbon-friendly cement. And there are a couple of, breakthrough energy ventures, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett's kind of big kind of venture plus fund looking at climate solutions. They're looking at a couple of new startups and companies looking at climate-friendly cement, which could not only not emit CO2, there are some people saying we could make concrete that absorbs CO2 and locks it up into calcium carbonate. That would be a neat trick. So those are the kinds of things buildings could do. But also the energy use, of course, of the building when it's standing. The heating, the lighting, the air conditioning, and so on. And as we think about a warmer and warmer world, with billions of people joining the global middle class, air conditioning is going to be a major, major issue for residences, office buildings, schools, and so on. And then, not to go on too much, but in Drawdown 1.0, we pointed out that refrigeration and cooling and air conditioning was probably the single largest area to focus on because of the energy they use, but also the gases inside those refrigeration coils is a potent greenhouse gas too, called hydrofluorocarbons. And so we need to really think about these things.
Now, with the hydrofluorocarbons, in a typical household, when we were talking to Paul said, we don't need to worry about that because that's a government regulation thing and it'll get taken care of. How do you think about, how we manage our refrigeration issues and our air conditioning in a typical home scenario? Do we have a responsibility to worry about that?
Yeah, I would disagree a little bit with how maybe Paul characterized that. I didn't hear that interview, but yes, there are regulations for this kind of thing, which are helpful, but we need to make sure. So in the United States, for example, when you dispose of a refrigerator, a freezer, an air conditioner, make doubly sure that it's properly disposed of in your local municipal landfills and so on. They will go and recover those gases or chemically destroy them. But again, those gases inside the coils, if they leak out, they can wreak havoc in the atmosphere. They're really, really bad for climate change. But in a lot of countries, they don't have those regulations. So that's a real problem in West Africa, for example. In Ghana, some companies have gone in to go recover those gases, those coils from landfills where they're not disposed of properly and chemically destroy the gases before they can leak into the atmosphere. So we need more than just regulation. I think we need a more proactive stance. But in the kind of tech and investment space, I would love to see us invent new kinds of coolants that do not harm the climate system or the ozone layer. That's actually why we originally got rid of the so-called chlorofluorocarbons back in the 70s, because those hurt the ozone layer. We replaced them with hydrofluorocarbons, which are ozone friendly. They're not climate friendly. Whoops. So now we got to go back and do it again. And there are lots of different ways to use coolants like ammonia, other gases we could use, or solid state cooling systems. There's lots of interesting innovations there. So I think it's more than just regulation. It's kind of our own responsibility. It's helping other countries where regulatory environments aren't as strong. And I think there's a real business and tech play here too, to make better air conditioning, better refrigeration. I don't think telling the world that you can't refrigerate your food or live in a place that isn't sweltering is a good solution. I think we need to figure out how to do that without harming our planet, and we certainly can.
Yeah, there are plenty of opportunities there.
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan, how did you get drawn into this work? You've spent your whole career as a climate scientist. What brought you to it?
Yeah, I've been working on climate change and related issues for about 3 decades now. And I have my PhD in climate science. I spent 20 years as a research scientist in universities, at the University of Wisconsin, the University of Minnesota, leading kind of large sustainability research teams. And the science is important. We got into this mess because we didn't listen to the science. So that, knowing more, understanding more is always important. But for me, I decided I kind of wanted to get out a little bit more and learn how to communicate that science better to larger audiences. So I left the kind of research world, and then I came to San Francisco to run a museum. The California Academy of Sciences is one of the great science museums of the world, and they gave me a chance to kind of use it as a platform to talk about sustainability and climate change and so on in a way that really engages people in conversation and thoughtful discourse, and it was really a lot of fun. And then a year ago, I left that looking for kind of the next opportunity. And then Paul Hawken and others from Project Drawdown asked me to take over Project Drawdown to kind of help take it to the next level, where we could really help not just describe climate solutions, but go out in the world and help implement them. How do we move $1 trillion into those 100 climate solutions? How do we get 1 billion people engaged in believing climate change isn't just serious, it's serious and it's solvable. We can do this. So I'm pretty excited. It's one part science, it's a part science communication, and one part kind of entrepreneurship. It's like, how do we go do this stuff and make it actually happen in the world? So it's kind of an interesting journey so far, but it's good work on stuff that matters.
As you think about this from a purely an ordinary person standpoint,
Yeah.
Forget the role as investor, forget the role of climate scientist, entrepreneur, day-to-day living. All of us are doing things that contribute to climate change. Mm-hmm. What are the biggest opportunities we have in our day-to-day lives to reduce our climate impact?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get asked that a lot. And before I answer that, I want to just recognize there is a little tension in that conversation right now, because on one hand, we do feel, and we do have, a little bit of responsibility to what's happening to the atmosphere. After all, it's 7 billion of us living our lives that are contributing to this problem. On the other hand, there are other actors, big companies, governments, and so on, that are much more influential than any of us could ever be. And some of them have not only contributing to the problem, they've actually deliberately stopped the rest of us from solving it. So it can be kind of disheartening to feel like, my actions don't matter. But let me tell you, they do. Because we're not just consumers. Yes, we can do stuff at home, and I'll get to what we can do at home. But the biggest thing we can do about climate change is to learn about it, to talk about it, and share what we know and what we learn with others. All of us today are little media empires, if you include our Facebook page and Twitter handles, all that stuff. Get engaged in this. We don't just live in our kitchens and living rooms. We live in a building or homes or neighborhoods and communities where we talk to people and interact. A lot of us go to work where things could be happening there, or we go to school, or we go to places of worship. So I think we're a lot more powerful than just somebody who buys a light bulb. And I want people to remember that. We're also voters. We're also should hold our public officials accountable to everything that concerns us, regardless of party. That's not about partisanship. It's just about civics. And so if climate change matters to you, and it should, you want to make sure your political leaders know that it matters to you too, and it should matter to them. And so that's kind of where, the big picture. But getting to, the what can I do in the home part of my life? Again, remember, you're a lot more than just the light bulb person. But I would say the biggest things, of course, are around efficiency. Let's use our energy more efficiently. So yes, lighting does matter. So changing out those light bulbs when they burn out to new LEDs, do it. More importantly, though, is air conditioning. If you have an old air conditioning system and it breaks down, maybe it's time to replace it. Make sure it's the most efficient you can afford. Same thing with any appliances. Go with those Energy Star things. They'll save you money. All the things I'm recommending will save you money and return that investment better than any mutual fund would today. You don't have to put solar panels on your roof if you can't afford them. Often you can buy into renewable energy neighborhood credits or through your local utility if you don't want to put those things on your roof or you can't afford them. Cars, transportation, that's really important. Maybe you can't afford a Tesla or something, but hey, maybe rethink that big SUV if you really don't need it. Try to get something. If your car gets less than like 50 miles per gallon today or 40, rethink it. There are dozens and dozens of things that can do better than that today. In fact, some that use no gas at all, and they're getting increasingly affordable.
Yeah, a used Leaf was practically free to acquire, and it is almost free to operate. So anyway, I hate to interrupt your thought, but I'm a big fan of the used Leaf as a climate solution.
Well, exactly. Yeah, and what's fascinating too, along these lines, maybe a tangent, but I was just hearing yesterday that about 2 years ago, Bloomberg, news folks projected that battery-powered cars, electric cars, would be cheaper than gas-powered cars as soon as 2027. They just had to revise that the other day and say, nope, that's going to happen in 2022, because batteries are getting cheaper. Kind of like Moore's law, they're just plummeting in price. And so, there are no moving parts in electric cars except the wheels, basically. Yeah. You don't have to, have carburetors and, all this kind of fancy stuff. And so the electric cars actually will eventually, and not too far in the future, about 2 or 3 years from now, will be cheaper than gas-powered cars. I think it just make them obsolete. And that's what I love about these tech disruptions is that solar and wind now are cheaper than coal. You don't need Washington to tell us don't burn coal. No one's going to burn coal anymore. The market won. Electric cars, the market will win. Again, I'd love policy to accelerate that and make it faster, but guess what? Better ideas are simply better ideas. But other climate solutions too aren't just the energy stuff I mentioned, but a really crucial one is around food. And yes, 2 things matter the most. One is reducing the amount of meat we eat, especially red meat. Beef and lamb in particular are very significantly contributing to climate change, unless you can guarantee that that's like grass-fed beef on particular kinds of farms. But that's maybe 1 to 3% of the beef supply, and it's not quite scaled yet.
Yeah, it is interesting. It's really not the cow's fault. It's the farmer's fault that cows contribute so much to climate change.
Well, yeah, I mean, cattle release methane. They burp methane, and methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas. So no matter what you do, the cattle are releasing methane. There are ways to reduce that, though, maybe by changing their feed and so on. But the trick would be instead of putting the cattle in feedlots at the end of their life, where they're so-called finished, where they put on a lot of weight and fat and marble the meat the way Americans like, if you finish them on grass, just let them continue to graze. The theory is that the grass could be regeneratively growing and building up the soil and accumulating so much carbon in the soil, making deep, rich, organic soils, that would offset whatever the cattle are doing. There are some farmers who demonstrated this, or ranchers, I should say, that they can do this. There's a big project in Marin County here in California that's clearly demonstrating this works, especially if they add a little compost to the soil, coming from San Francisco's municipal compost system, by the way. So there's some pretty interesting solutions on the horizon there, but right now, that's such a small fraction of the US beef supply as a whole. Probably a better rule of thumb is eat less beef, and when you do eat beef, don't waste it, and try to make sure it does come from grass when you can. But then it leads to the other, and I know that's controversial. There are a lot of people who still love to eat beef. I like to eat beef. I just eat it very, very rarely now as a treat. But what I would recommend is everybody can get on board with this, I hope, is food waste. The Americans waste about 40% of all the food that we bring into the US system through our own agriculture and import. Basically all the food flowing around the US, only 60% of it is eaten. 40% is tossed away somewhere at homes or the supermarkets or sometimes out on the farmer's field. we can reduce that number. Think of anything else where, you're throwing 40% away of something. That's an opportunity to, that's a resource. That's money. That's really cool. Let's go tap that stuff. And it turns out food waste is also present in many other countries too, around maybe 30% globally. And so there are opportunities not just in the US, but other places in the world to reduce food waste. And that's actually one of our top climate solutions, reducing food waste. If 40% of the food we grow isn't eaten, that means 40% of those greenhouse gas emissions tied to food weren't necessary, or 40% of the land wasn't necessary, or the water, or the pollution, and so on and so on. So kind of tightening up the food system by changing our diets, but mostly by reducing the waste in our system would be a huge opportunity. So that's where I'd recommend kind of tune up your electricity, efficiency, appliances, air conditioning, lighting, transportation, get that electric car if you want, or at least something like a hybrid or whatever, unless you truly, really, really need one of those trucks and SUVs, but often you can rent them on the occasion you need them once in a while. And then lastly is your diet. Less food waste, less red meat. And we make a pretty big difference. But again, more importantly, isn't just our own little personal virtue, it's sharing those things. How do we get food waste at our company's cafeteria to go down? Not just at our homes, but how do you scale that to thousands of people? That's going to be at work. That's going to be at school. That's going to be at your place of worship or in your community centers. How do you magnify what you're doing to 100x, 10,000x? A lot of people can do that, and you don't have to be a politician or a scientist to do it.
Yeah, great point. Jonathan, what are you most proud of having accomplished at Project Drawdown?
Well, I'm really proud of what, and I can't take any credit for this. I just joined Project Drawdown about 8 months ago, but I'm really proud of what we call kind of Drawdown 1.0 did. This book, for example, that was really the work of, about 100 people came together to pull this off, where they asked the simple question, is there enough out there now to solve climate change? Can we stop climate change with the tools we have available? Nobody really knew. So they went and researched about 100 different climate solutions, asking how big are they? How much would they cost? And they used the same yardstick to measure them all, which is pretty cool. Before, the electricity people would look at it one way and food people look at it a different way, and then building people, you were comparing apples to oranges to kiwis and grapefruits and all this crazy stuff. We did the first real apple to apple to apple comparison and added it up and showed, wow, there is enough here. This is great with the existing technologies. And we're getting more in all the time, and they're all getting cheaper. This is great news, and nobody had really said that before. And was also the second thing I'm really proud of what the team did is they didn't write it in some obscure technical volume and a bunch of journal articles in the scientific literature, which is what people like me used to do a lot of. They wrote a coffee table book, for crying out loud. They put it in the most accessible format possible right out of the gate. And that was genius. And they wrote it in a very accessible and kind of beautiful way. And this has been the best-selling climate book in the world for quite a while now. It's selling like hotcakes still in multiple languages, which is really great. The downside, though, is even though it's a best-selling climate book, the bar is set pretty low for that number. It's not like John Grisham and Stephen King are up here. Climate books are down here. So even the best-selling climate book in the world, which this is still not getting the reach we need and the speed we need to kind of get these ideas into even broader circulation. That's why working with media is so important. We're in Drawdown 2.0. We're moving from book to all digital, and building a living, breathing platform to come together around climate solutions with the latest research changing by the day, the newest opinions and thought leadership, the debates about solutions, resources, a directory to find out who in the world is implementing them and how can I find them, how can I invest in them, how can I support them, how can I implement what they're doing over here into my town, all of that. So we really want to kind of build tools that help scale these solutions out into the world. And we're finding that there's so much that needs to be done here to just connect the dots and scale as quickly as possible and get this stuff out in the world. And we're excited to do that.
Oh, fantastic. Jonathan, as you reflect on your work over your career in and around climate science, what's the most important takeaway?
I think the most important takeaway right now to me is that people in my line of work and many other parallel tracks have been so frustrated for decades because we've been banging our fist on the table saying, look, this is a big problem. It's serious. The climate is changing. It's real. And I think finally the world has heard it. I don't know if they heard the scientists as much as the politicians, the activists. I think they're hearing Mother Nature, frankly, more than us, but whatever it takes, I guess. But people are, regular folks are out there like, wait a minute, we're having these 100-year floods like every couple of years. We're having heat records broken by them year all the time. So, even the most kind of skeptical person who doesn't trust scientists is saying, whoa, something's going on here. So that's been kind of an interesting shift. The problem with that is, the big takeaway for me is, people are now aware of climate change. We, clearly about 90% of Americans now believe climate change is real or could be real. Only a small fraction are really digging in their heels saying it's a hoax or whatever, but I don't worry about those guys. About 90%. The problem is about 80% of Americans feel it's kind of hopeless. There's not much we can do. And that's what worries me, is if we only look at Washington, of course you're going to feel that way. It's a mess. But don't look there. That's never where leadership happens anyway. Look around your community. Look at Silicon Valley. Look at what's going on in other countries. Look what's happening in California, New York City, New York State, other places. Amazing things are happening. And that's what gets me excited, but also a little scared. So the big takeaway for me is that climate change isn't just a science and technological problem. It's not just a investment and business problem or even a policy problem. A bit of it is a culture problem. If you don't believe a better future is possible, you can't build it. Martin Luther King didn't go around telling people, I have a nightmare. I remember he said, I have a dream, And that's what I think we need to do with climate change, is stop harping on the doom and gloom. People have heard us already. They got it. It's serious. It could be a mess. Let's start talking about possibilities. Let's talk about opportunities and solutions. And let's talk about collaboration, where we can come together. I think Americans and people around the world are hungry for that vision of a better world where we pull together, do what's necessary, and solve a serious problem. And that's when we're at our best. That's what I think is a big takeaway. And the other maybe is, I just turned 50 last year, and in my lifetime, all the things I was told were impossible when I was a kid turned out not only to be possible, they were inevitable. Like when I was a kid, nobody believed gay marriage. That's never going to happen. It's now the law. An African-American president, never. We just had one, probably have another one soon. That's great. Or the end of the Soviet Union and communism. Like, no, that'll never happen. Or we'll all have died in a nuclear war with the USSR. Apartheid ending, and so on and so on and so on. So when people tell me climate change isn't solvable, it's impossible, I kind of smile and say, oh yeah, want to bet? Bring it on. I think we can do this.
Why is this important to you? I get that it's important, right? Mm-hmm. I don't mean to suggest for a nanosecond that this isn't important. Why is it important to you?
Well, my own version of this story is, I think, and I think it's one we all share a little bit. At our best, humans have a kind of unwritten compact with other generations. There are people who came before us who worked really hard, who sacrificed, who did the hard work of building their family, building a community, and maybe they even set aside some of their own desires to make sure their children lived a better life, that they had more opportunities than their parents did. And we inherited that. We, from thousands of generations, people have worked, sweat, and died in some cases to make sure we could live a little bit better. I want to be part of that too. I want to be a good ancestor. I do not want to be the first generation in human history that deliberately and knowingly leaves a crappier world for the future than the one we had. But unfortunately, that's kind of where we're headed if we don't change our ways. That's where our political leaders are pointing us. That's where kind of thoughtless consumerism is kind of pointing us. We're just not being our best selves. So I'd like us to stand up and be our better selves. And I think, to me, I have a personal version of that story. I think about my mom, who was deeply influential to me, but died when I was very young, and asked me to, the day before she died, she asked me to do the best I could with my life to make sure, I contributed something. So I remember that every day. But that story is not unique to me. It's, I think, one, if we look hard at our own personal histories, there are people who might inspire us in our family's past, or even in the community, or people we know. who kind of stood up and were better people and made the world better for people that they may never even meet, but they'll come after them. I'd like to be part of that again. I'd like to capture that old thing we used to call the American dream. It's not unique to America, but the idea that at our best, we can build a better future for people who come after us. And that's what it's all about. And I'd really like to see that again. And I think that's personal to me, but I don't think it's unique. And if we can just be inspired to be the better version of ourselves, I think we could live a really beautiful life that's really fulfilling and full of purpose and meaning, and really reconnect to who we are and to connect to each other. We're living in this hyper polarized world where red versus blue, urban, rural, whatever. And the politicians love it. They like to divide us. The cable news companies love it. They like to divide us. Social media loves it because they like to divide us. This is all for ad revenue and clicks and votes. But the rest of us are screwed. What we ought to remember is that when we come together, we're at our best. We have so much more in common than what tears us apart. And what we can share in common, I think, is a love of our children, of the future generations that come after us, of nature, of feeling inspired together to come together and do something magnificent. I think we need that kind of vision and leadership again. And maybe we'll have to find it in ourselves rather than looking out there in Washington and the media for it.
Jonathan, what's your superpower?
Well, I don't know. I know what my kryptonite is. A bunch of those. I guess one thing I really like to do, I don't know how good I am at it, but I like to be kind of a fence straddler. I think that it's an uncomfortable place to sit, sitting on the edge of a fence. You can be uncomfortable, you can fall off. But I like to have kind of one foot in the world of the science and one foot in the world of the real world. And how do you take really good, rigorous science into the real world? But more importantly, is how do you take the concerns of everyday folks, but also businesses, of communities and so on, back to the scientists, saying, hey, you're doing great work over here, but you're not asking the right questions. What people really need to know is this. And so I guess that's why I like to, a little bit of shuttle diplomacy or fence straddling, whatever you want to call it, between kind of the scientific world and kind of the real world. I think it's really important in both directions, though. It's not just the science talking, informing people. It's not a megaphone. I remember my mom used to say something too, it's pretty funny, where, we're born with 2 ears and 1 mouth. Try to use them in that ratio. So it's important to listen much more than we speak. And I think we'd all do a little better if we did that.
Brilliant point. Jonathan, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. Before you go, would you take just a minute and tell people how they can learn more about Project Drawdown and how they can connect with you and your team?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we do have a book, but you don't have to go out and buy it or anything. That would be great if you wanted to. Go get that on Amazon. It's just called Drawdown. But everything that's in it is available for free on our website. So if you go to drawdown.org, just one word, drawdown.org, you'll find all of our stuff, which is great. And on social media, we're very active on Twitter, and there's a huge Facebook following. So just search for Drawdown on Twitter and Facebook. We're at Project Drawdown from Twitter and just / Project Drawdown from Facebook.com. So you should be able to find us. And I'm on all social media personally too, and you can find me easy to remember as a global eco guy is my little handle on Twitter, Facebook, and even Instagram, I think. So you should be able to find us all there. And we're happy to chat with you all too. Let's engage in a conversation and learn more from each other.
All righty. Jonathan, thank you very much for being with us today. And we wish you every success in solving climate change.
Well, we're going to have to do all this one together, but thank you very much, Devin. Thanks for the opportunity to be on your show. Really appreciate it.
All righty. Let's do some good.
Thanks.
Devin Thorpe's mission is to end extreme poverty, improve global health, and mitigate climate change before 2045 by finding and sharing the stories of those who are doing the most good.
Thanks for tuning in to the Your Mark on the World show, the Social Impact Podcast. Please subscribe via YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or Spotify.